Thanks for coming out in the rain, and thank God for the rain. It's not that it's as heavy as I would like, but it's here. The prayer that we just entered into speaks of the main means by which we experience God's self-revelation. And I highlighted that in the prayers with capital letters: creation, sacred scripture, events throughout history, ultimately the person of Jesus Christ, and certainly how we can see the presence of God being revealed through others. Everything that I'm about to share with you is out of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, okay? And it's based on what the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops has called and referred to as the knowledge of Catholic faith, okay? And this is what they believe all of us should know. And I think many of the things are fascinating. Now, I have thrown a few other things in there to highlight and to bring deeper meaning, usually some stories, okay? So the Catechism says that a desire for God has been something that has been part of humanity ever since the human mind has evolved, okay? The ancient Greeks, the Romans, every culture has looked at the other, some type of religious being, to answer those things that are mystery. And God is mystery. Even in the age of science, there are those who were exclusively scientific that eventually came to the idea that there is something that created all this. St. Thomas Aquinas would refer to this something as the uncaused cause. If any of you have Thomistic theology or philosophy, you'll know the uncaused cause. Now, you'll see my friend up here, Mr. Einstein. He has traveled with me in many classrooms. That way you can see how battered he has been. And you'll hear as I go through this evening, every time I have, young students, they will often say, well, I don't believe in God. And so I always point to Einstein. I say, are you brighter than him? Okay? And I love his statement here. I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details. Okay? So I always point to Mr. Einstein, who is always a great source of encouragement, and sometimes it helps the students rethink things, okay? In the 17th century, Blaise Pascal said this, okay? Now remember, Pascal was a mathematician, a physicist, an inventor, a writer, a defender of scientific method, and later he became a Christian philosopher, okay? And he made this statement that has, I think, eminently wise advice. Belief in God is a wise wager. Granted that faith cannot be proven, what harm will come to you if you gamble on its truth and it proves false? If you gain all. If you lose nothing. Wager then, without hesitation, that God exists. I use that one with my students too, okay? So before we go any further in our discussion, the investigation of God's existence and self-revelation that the Catechism of the Catholic Church suggests we look at, first are the causes of non-belief. Now that's an interesting thing. The Catechism goes right to that because this is something that has been age-old. We think oftentimes in the 21st and the 20th century that there was this non-belief in God, this atheism. It has always existed, okay? And the church has always recognized that there are good reasons for it, okay? And let's take a look at them. And then you think about your friends, your family members who maybe doubt the existence of God. And some of these things you will have heard out of their mouths, okay? A revolt against the idea of God when there is so much evil in the world. Hello? Right? An indifference and a malaise towards everything anyway. Cares and riches of the world obscuring God. You've seen that one. The scandal, and I think this is very interesting, the Catechism writes this. The scandal and bad example of religious leaders and professed Christians. The much blemished history of the Catholic Church, the Inquisition, the Holocaust, the scandal for centuries in the church in Rome. Okay? There is a book, I don't know if I brought it with me. No. It's the Decameron. Okay? It was written by Giovanni Boccaccio. It was written at the same time as Alighieri's, Dante Alighieri's work on the Divine Comedy, okay? But the Divine Comedy became one of those things that the church wanted everyone to read because it wanted to scare everyone into faith. And the one on the Decameron were a number of stories where individuals actually had moved out of the cities because of the plague, and they were telling stories. And in these stories, they were telling stories about why some individuals did not believe, and many of them had to do with clerics that were not behaving themselves. Okay? Now, that's one of the things that I think is very, very important. The human condition plays a role in this, okay? Let's just suppose I'm having a bad day, okay? You're having a particularly difficult day. There's something going on in your life that is very, very important to you, okay? And because I'm having a bad day, I blow you off. What happens? There is immediately a block there because somehow or other, a cleric represents God. Okay? That's why I'm very careful with, even when I teach in the high school classroom, I'm very careful with my students in terms of how I correct them. Okay? Usually with humor. Because you know what? If I correct a kid for talking in class, I can put a barrier between me and that kid, and if that kid has a real problem in their life, we're not bound to come to me. Okay? Because I put a barrier. Okay? So we have to take a look at some of those things. Now, when I was a teacher at Archbishop Committee, I always gave my seniors this assignment. I asked them to write a simple essay, one paragraph, okay, on their image of God. Okay? Now, I had 5 senior classes. And adolescents being who they are, I'm struggling with individuating, okay, from their families and their parents belief in God. There are always those who are ready to reject the very idea of religion, and therefore God. So at least 5 or 6 out of every one of the kids in the class would hand in a blank paper saying, I don't believe in God. Well, the next day, I handed the assignments back and gave the atheists an opportunity to express their brand of atheism, okay? And instead of doing a 1-paragraph essay on their image of God, they now had a 10-page paper on what kind of atheists they were. Because I said, if you are a decent, abiding atheist, you better be able to explain to another atheist why you don't believe. Are you a materialist? Are you a universalist? What kind of atheist are you? All of a sudden they got God. Now, interestingly, in this classroom was a young boy by the name of Dan, absolute atheist. So to my surprise, he went on the senior retreat. I was just amazed to see that he was on this senior retreat. Now, at the end of this retreat, we handed out these clay discs that were on pieces of leather, okay? And on the clay disc was a Greek cross, the square cross, okay? And I asked him when he was wearing it, I said, Danny, why are you wearing that? He said, oh, I see it as a plus side. A commitment to being positive. I smiled, and he smiled, and we never spoke of it again until the end of the school year, when he shared with me that he was entering a Benedictine monastery. He's been there for 18 years now. Okay? But when we evangelize, we're called to respond as Jesus did with the people. He found the people where they were. Okay? He appreciated what was going on in their lives, where they were in their faith journey. Now, in my day, had I told a priest I didn't believe, he would have grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and thrown me up against the lockers. Mostly. Not all, but mostly. Because they would be so offended by it. Okay? Now, all of us in our families or close friends have individuals who do not believe. I want you to take some time and think about them and their circumstances in life. We're going to pause for a few moments. What are the things I just mentioned or others? And if you come up with others, please let me know their reasons for disbelief. Now, take some time, if you would. Let's take about 5 minutes. If you feel comfortable talking to the person next to you, great. Okay? But I think it's important for us to be able to share some of the struggles we have with people in our own families and why they don't believe. Okay, talk amongst yourselves, as they say. Go ahead. So, I think that's an important thing for them. Okay, something that came out, and I want you to be involved in this conversation as much as you want to or don't want to, okay? The last time I did the presentation was pretty much European style. I just talked. Okay? But I asked here if they knew anyone, and they said no. They have people that are not exactly vigorous about going to church. But they mentioned something that I think is most important for us to remember. Just because they're not vigorous about going to church doesn't mean that they don't believe in God. Okay? But sometimes we equate that. Okay? Sometimes we equate that. We say, oh, they don't believe. They don't go, so they don't believe. Okay? Anyone want to share something? Non-belief, lack of belief, trouble.
One of my sisters has a great devotion to the Blessed Mother. And she says the rosary, and she even says novenas, but she doesn't go to Mass. It just follows by mine.
You know what? That is not uncommon in a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, okay? Now, I don't know what your ethnic background is. Okay. They're usually the people that go to church. But in the Latin culture, like Italians, okay, religion is very much so focused around the home, okay? And therefore, different pieties, okay? Novenas, lighted candles. I cannot forget. I would go to my grandmother's home, my maternal grandmother's home, and she would always have a vigil light burning in front of the Blessed Mother. Always. And in the other room, there would be another vigil light burning in front of the Infant of Prague. Okay? There are pieties, okay? And there are practices that people become involved in, but they don't necessarily go to church or go to Mass, okay? Now, the killer for me on that one is this. The Eucharist. The very real presence of Jesus Christ giving himself to us. I don't think the majority of Catholics understand that. I really don't. Because if they understood, this church would be packed. Every church in the valley, in the country, in the world would be packed. Okay? Now, I think what we're dealing with, okay, and you tell me what you think, okay? This is what I've been looking at over the last 31 years of being a priest. My grandparents and my parents may not have had the advanced education, okay, that many people do have today, but they knew their faith. Now we have people in the pews that are educated but don't know their faith. That's what I'm presupposing right now, okay? And it may be incorrect, but from what I've seen so far, okay, I think it's pretty much right on target. And what did we do wrong? Okay? And when I say what did we do wrong, in terms of what as a church, as an institution, what did we not do? Maybe the changes in Vatican II were not moved the way they needed to move, okay? Maybe it was too quick, maybe it wasn't done well enough. People like all the mystery, okay, kind of went out in the old, you go to Mass in Latin, there's smells and bells and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden it's all gone, okay? But how did we catechize? How did we teach people, okay? Today, it's very interesting. If I go on retreat with the kids, or I'm having a small group liturgy with the kids, I'll ask them, as we do the little planning, I'll say, would you like the Lord have mercy of the penitential rite in English, or would you like it in the Greek, the Kyrie? They want the Greek. They want the Agnus Dei in Latin, okay? Because it pulls them out of, it's something totally other, okay? There's some mystery. Now, what is the remedy for people that may have been somewhat removed from a relationship with God or a relationship with the church? And you can't equate them, okay? All right? I always say to people, our deposit of faith is in God. If our deposit of faith is in the church, we have just moved into idolatry, okay? The deposit of faith is always in our relationship with God. The remedy, prayer and patience. I have said this over and over and over and over to parents. God will work in God's own time with each and every person. Trust that God is working within them already, and it is not your task or mine to bring them to faith. Our task is to live our own lives faithfully, and most especially by good example. And the patron of the school where I am right now said it succinctly, Francis of Assisi. Preach always, if necessary, these words. Isn't that true? People are drawn to individuals that really walk the talk. Okay? They really are. So now on to the meat of tonight's session. God's ongoing self-revelation. We've seen through major covenants, deeds and words. First, in creation itself, has always been seen by the church as an act of the manifestation of God's love, and thus God's existence and self-revelation. Creation is God's first covenant with humanity. Creation itself is a manifestation of God's love. From there, we go into the next, and that's Noah and the flood and the rainbow. Okay? God wishes to give humanity another opportunity. And the rainbow has been a sign and symbol of the covenant to never destroy the world again by water. The call of Abram. Notice in the call, God gives Abram a new name, Abraham. With this covenant, God calls Abraham to be the father of a nation. God tells Abraham that he will be the father of countless peoples. And when we look at all the major religions, or great monotheisms of the world, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all refer to Abraham as their father in faith. Every one of them. Okay? Now, interestingly enough, you see Abram's name is changed to Abraham because there's going to be a new life. Remember when religious priests, brothers and sisters, entered religious life? They took different names. It was an indicator. That's where this comes from. Okay? That there was going to be a new life, a new transformation in that person. After the call of Abraham, we have Moses and the freedom of slavery of Egypt and the new land. The Hebrews at this point eventually become known as the Israelites. Then we have the prophets throughout the ages. God both challenges and brings consolation to the peoples. Our preaching tradition is very much based on the action of the prophets. For just as the prophets, the preached word is to, here we go, you've heard me say this before, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Okay? The ultimate revelation of God is in the person of Jesus Christ. The covenant of God with humanity as God becomes incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ. Countless theologians throughout the ages have spoken and written of the existence of God and how God has revealed God's self. But one of the earliest and key theologians was St. Augustine of Hippo. Now remember, this guy started out as a real party boy. Okay? He wanted nothing to do with God because that was going to curtail his behavior. Okay? But eventually God wins him over big time. He stated so simply yet so eloquently, we are created as images of God, and as such we are naturally drawn to that God. Because we are created in the image of God, we are drawn to that God. What is meant by the proofs of the existence of God? We need to be clear that in theological language, the sense of proof is not what we would see as proofs in natural sciences, but rather what is known in philosophy as converging and convincing arguments. As mentioned earlier, Thomistic philosophy, which is based on Aristotle, speaks of God as the first cause or the uncaused cause. Okay? Now, how God communicates with us from Scripture, tradition, lived experience, order and beauty, the human person in and of themselves, and certainly over time, again, through the events, creation, Noah and the flood, the call of Abraham, Moses, the prophets and patriarchs, and Jesus Christ. Now, please be patient with me, because you're going to hear a passage from the Scripture that you may find somewhat annoying, but after explaining it, it will have new meaning to you. On the fourth Sunday of Advent, in a particular cycle, there is the reading of the genealogy of Jesus. Do you remember that? This one begat that one who begat that one who begat that one. So listen to this. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham became the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah became the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab became the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz became the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed became the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David, the king. David became the father of Solomon, whose mother had been the wife of Uriah. Solomon became the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asaph, Asaph became the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, Joram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah became the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. Hezekiah became the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos. Amos the father of Josiah. Judah, Josiah became the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the Babylonian exile. After the Babylonian exile, Jeconiah became the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud became the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zedek, Zedek became the father of Achim, Achim the father of Eliud, Eliud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar became the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Of her was born Jesus, who is the Messiah. Thus the total number of generations from Abraham to David is 14 generations. From David to the Babylonian exile, 14 generations. From the Babylonian exile to the Messiah, 14 generations. Now that's a mouthful, isn't it? I need a little bit of water. Now, did you notice that in the midst of that genealogy, And among all those mentioned, there were only 5 women mentioned. Only 5 women. But Matthew has a reason and a rationale for doing that. And it's very important. 4 of the 5 are outsiders. They're not Jewish. Only Mary is of the Jewish bloodline. Interesting, huh? Ooh. All of these foreigners are part of the lineage of Jesus. And that in itself tells us that this God is meant for everyone. And that's why Matthew includes those names of those women. Because remember, Matthew is the teaching gospel. He's going to teach us. So let's take a look at each of the 5 women mentioned in that order in which they were mentioned and see what other realizations might come about. You have to absolutely love this stuff, okay? Tamar, she appears in the 38th chapter of Genesis. She was married to the eldest son of Judah, okay? And his name was Now, is struck dead by God for some wickedness and leaves Tamar without a child, okay? Now, according to the law of the day, the next son must marry Tamar to provide her with an offspring and raise the child as his brother's progeny. Okay? So the next son, named Onan, is not so thrilled about this. And he does, in fact, marry, but according to the story, he cannot go through the intimate act and withdraws from Tamar before impregnating her. This does not sit well with God. So Onan is struck dead. So that's 2. Now Judah, the father of these 2 boys, now is thinking that Tamar is the Black Widow and refuses to allow his youngest son, Shelah, to enter into marriage, even though the law says this is how it's supposed to be. Now remember, a woman has no standing unless she had a father, a husband, or a male child. So Tamar was determined to seek justice. Well, time goes by, and eventually Judah's wife dies, and he intends to go off to shear his sheep in another locale. Tamar sees an opportunity to seek justice from Judah. She goes to the area where Judah will be shearing sheep, and Judah is, shall we say, feeling somewhat amorous. Tamar, dressed in disguise, and presents herself as a prostitute, and Judah lies to her. She demands payment, but since Judah has no money with him, she simply requests from him his staff, his seal, and his cord, and she will hold them until he can make payment. Okay? Now Tamar is now pregnant and unwed, and Judah sees this as a terrible violation and calls for her to be stoned to death, because that's what was happening to women that were pregnant but not married. Okay? So Tamar sends Judah his staff, his seal, his cord to him and says in the message, "It is the owner of this staff, this cord, this seal, that is the father of my child." Thus she exposes Judah's sin. As a result, she has twins, Perez and Zerah. So here we have, in the lineage of Jesus, a temptress. Okay? But seeking justice. It was her right. Next up, Rahab. Rahab, she shows up in the book of Joshua. She is a prostitute living in the walls of Jericho. She has heard of the God of the Israelites and is moved by all that the Israelite God has done for his people. So when the Israelite spies arrive on the scene, she assists them. Long story short, she helps in the takeover of the city of Jericho. Little aside, Rahab used a piece of red fabric to indicate where she was and how to enter into the walls of Jericho. Hence the red light district. There's where it comes from. In both the letter to the Hebrews and the letter of James, there is a reference to the great faith of Rahab, but they call her the harlot. And they do that for a reason. They do that for a reason. To place before all of us that people of faith come from all kinds of backgrounds. And we should be aware of that. Now Rahab ends up getting married to Salmon, and they have together then Boaz. Okay, so now we have a temptress and a harlot as part of the genealogy of Jesus. Shall I go on? 5 minutes. Next up, Ruth. Ruth appears in, of course, the book of Ruth. Now that in itself is amazing. The Jewish Bible has a book named after Ruth, who is a non-Jew. She's a Moabite. She was seen as a non-believer, a pagan. Ooh, terrible. Now, Ruth's husband dies, and she's left with her mother-in-law, Naomi. Naomi is a Jew. Naomi encourages Ruth to return to her people, and Ruth states beautifully, and you've all heard this, I'm sure, at some point or another. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God too. So Ruth goes with Naomi to Bethlehem, and Naomi remembers that she has a family member by the name of Boaz. Does not reveal this to Ruth, okay? In those days, if you remember, the poor were allowed to do what was known as gleaning. They were allowed to go to the areas where the crops were and take the leftovers, okay? And so Naomi sends Ruth to glean in Boaz's field. And it's a nice little setup. Boaz sees Ruth and says to her that she should just glean in his fields. Wink, wink. Well, there you go. Boaz and Ruth become an item, and the result is obeyed. So now we have a temptress, a harlot, and a Moabite, a non-Jew. Now, let's move on to the next woman in the genealogy, who is referred to as the wife of Uriah. Okay? Now, you probably know that her given name is Bathsheba. Okay? So here's the Reader's Digest condensed version of this one, because this one's really long and very common. David is the king of Israel at the time. One day he's on the top of his palace walking along, enjoying the sun, and all of a sudden on the rooftop of another building, he sees the wife of Uriah bathing. He likes what he sees. Okay? He's enamored with her, but she is married to Uriah. Now, Uriah is one of David's top military men who is actually out on a military mission. That does not deter him in wanting to be with Bathsheba. And so they get together, and there is a pregnancy that results. So, David now has to cover his tracks. So he calls Uriah back from the fields and hopes that he will lay with his wife. A little cover, you know? So Uriah, being the good and honorable soldier, will not go into his home. He will not enjoy any of the creature comforts, including his wife, while his men are in the battlefield. Poor David, his plan is foiled. So what does he do next? He sends Uriah back to the battlefield, and he gives instructions that when Uriah is at the front and in the thick of battle, the Israelite army is to pull back, thus leaving Uriah helpless. Uriah does in fact get killed, and now David is free to marry Bathsheba. And the result of that marriage is Solomon. You see how sordid this whole thing is? Okay, so now you have a temptress, a harlot, a Moabite, and an adulteress in the genealogy of Jesus. Mary now comes on the scene, an adolescent girl of childbearing age who is pregnant out of wedlock. Proof positive from all of this and more that our God is for everyone, and no one is outside the circle of God unless they choose to be outside the circle of God. Another huge revelation about who our God is. Matthew really did a masterful piece on this. If you really want to get the whole background on it, really done well theologically, Raymond Brown, Sulpician. He does this whole thing on the genealogy of Jesus and what the mention of the women tell us about God. So, human events in God's self-revelation. What I hear most often in terms of why people experience and believe in God is the birth of a child. They say the birth of the child is the most moving evidence of God's existence and God's love. Now, I don't know anything about that. Okay? But you all probably do. Okay? So, I want you now to talk to people at your elbow about that and other ways in which you actually have an experience of God and knowing solidly of God's existence in your life. Talk. Okay, anyone want to share? Anyone want to say something? And if you do, if you don't speak loudly, I'll make you go up to the microphone. Well, I mean, it's important for people to hear, right? No one wants to share? Okay, you don't have to. Good thing you're not mine. What did we get for parent participation? 10%? The grade. Okay. God's plan of salvation came to fullness through the person of Jesus Christ. The scriptural basis is found in the letter to the Hebrews. In the past, God spoke in partial and various ways to our ancestors, to the prophets. In these days, God has spoken to us through a Son, whom he made the heir of all things, and through whom he created the universe. Note that the Church and the Catechism speak of revelation being complete in Jesus Christ. It must be understood that revelation is complete in Jesus Christ, but as in any mystery, it is not completely understood. Okay? So there's a difference. Okay? It is, the revelation is complete in the person of Jesus Christ, but our understanding, because of mystery, will never be complete. The challenge placed before all of us, no matter whether we are parents, grandparents, teachers, etc., as people of faith, we are charged with continuing our search and to be patient and loving with those who are on the search and may even be lost.
Well, you were talking about St. Augustine. St. Monica was like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that poor thing. Poor Monica. Poor Monica. She was, but see, that is just it, you know. I think sometimes that patience is, you know, patient people are few and far between sometimes. And we have to be that way with people that are on a faith journey. Okay. Faith is our response to God's revelation. In the Catechism, it speaks of this particular section of how we are called to be obedient to God. Now, that also is another word that people in modern society do not like. Obedient. Well, in Latin, it's audere, which means to hear. To hear. And to take into account. And that's why I have the Chinese symbol up here. To listen, and you will notice the different aspects, if everyone can see this, okay? You will see that listening has to do with the eye, the ear, this means undivided attention, and the heart, okay? Listening has more than just the concept of the ear, but with one's entire being. And boy, is that true if we're going to listen to God. We have to listen with our entire being. To obey in faith is to submit freely to the word that has been heard because truth is guaranteed by God. Okay? I have a phrase that I absolutely love, and I use it with a lot of our kids, especially in the next few months as they hear about their acceptance or rejections to universities and colleges. Never be fearful of an unknown future with a known God who loves you. Okay? God will always see to our greater good. Left to our own devices, God only knows what we'll do. Okay? Any of you ever pray for something really earnestly, and then it didn't crack up to be what you thought it was going to be? Huh? I have. Okay? And I didn't submit myself to what is God's will in all of this. Okay? Take a look at the faith of someone such as Abraham. He was called by God and given a new name and an endless posterity. He believed in God's promise of a son even in his ancient age. So then he has this beloved son, Isaac. And then all of a sudden, God asks him to make an offering of Isaac, a sacrifice, to kill him and offer him. And Abraham is about to do that. And then all of a sudden, the angel says, no. Now that's faith. In the New Testament, it is Mary who is the most perfect embodiment of faith. Her yes took a great deal of faith and courage. Now remember, again, the punishment for being pregnant before marriage in Israel was death by stoning. Okay? I'm going to now return to the Trinity. Now remember what I said about all of our doctrine and dogma hinging on the Trinity. So here we have the Annunciation, right? The Father requests that Mary be the mother of Jesus through the angel Gabriel. The Holy Spirit is the source of the pregnancy, and Jesus is the result. Okay? So there you have the Trinitarian basis for our doctrine and dogma of the Annunciation. Again, in the letter of the Hebrews, it speaks eloquently and succinctly about faith. Listen to these words. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith is entrusting ourselves wholly and completely to God. Now, when I asked about experiences of God, my friend here said, he experiences God when people are dying in the death process. Very true. Think about this, okay? The death process can be likened to the birth process. Some labors, and the women you're going to understand this better than all of us, men, okay? Some labors are long and painful. Some labors are quick. Some transitions from this life are long and painful. Some are quick. Okay? We are being reborn into a new life with God. And people that are letting go of someone, okay, are the midwives. Okay? But the people that are leaving are going into the arms of God. In the sacrament of the sick, when it is being truly celebrated for the last time, it is referred to the Latin phrase that is familiar to any of you that are my age or older, extreme unction. Remember? Extreme unction. The reception of the anointing and communion for the last time on this earth. Okay? Included in this is what is known as the commendation of the dawn. Okay? Do you know the name given to communion when someone's given it the last time? It comes from the Latin word, it's called viaticum. And it translates food for the journey. It's beautiful. Food for the journey. Here are the words, and again, notice the operative of the Trinity in this sacrament. They're beautiful words, but they're also very final words. When I go and attend to a family whose family member or friend is obviously transitioning from this life to the next, I will often tell them what the prayers of the commendation of the dying sound like, to prepare them, okay? Because they are final, but they are beautiful. I pray God that someone is around and that I'm conscious enough to hear these on my deathbed. Person is being marked on the forehead with the oil of the sick. Okay? Go forth, Christian soul, to God the Father who created you, To God the Son who redeemed you. To God the Holy Spirit who has sustained you in this life. Go forth, Christian soul. Beautiful. But, final. Very final words. Okay, so the characteristics of faith. Faith, my friends, is a gift. A gift that is given, but as any gift is given to us, to be useful, it must be opened and then cared for, nurtured. Faith is a grace, is again an act of God's love. Again, a gift given to us needs to be activated by the one it is given to. Only an individual in cooperation with God can activate the gift of faith. This is where a lot of parents and people of great faith get frustrated. We cannot pour our faith into the head of someone else or into the heart of another person. We cannot. It does not work that way. I cannot tell you, and there are 3 clerics here besides me. In confession, I cannot tell you how many times parents and grandparents come and are beleaguered by the fact that their children are not going to Mass. How they failed. They didn't fail. You didn't fail. You did your best. People make choices. Okay? And that's very, very hard because oftentimes we think that we can give someone our faith. We cannot give it. We can share our faith by word and deed, but we cannot open someone up and pour it into them as much as we'd like to. Okay? Faith is also a human act. It involves a willingness to trust in the other. And this is both a rational act involving the intellect and the affect, the heart. For ages, there was a Latin phrase that was used for all of us who went through religious formation. Fides quaeridem intellectum. Faith seeking understanding. So we return to St. Augustine, who said, I believe in order to understand, and I understand the better to believe. Faith and science. The same God is the source of both. Just recently, you may have heard that our Holy Father, Pope Francis, an educator and a scientist, spoke to the fact that faith and science do in fact journey hand in hand with God as the source of both. The individual and the communal notions of faith. The question arises of how we came to our faith. Who became the models of faith in our lives? And what are their stories? Okay, audience participation again. Time for you to talk amongst yourselves. I want you to take some time and think about who had the primary influence on your faith life and then others along the way. There may have been some early in life and then others later in life. I can tell you my maternal grandmother and my mother, hands down. Hands down. And when we take a look at, priests, those that are called to priesthood, almost always mothers. Father Hayes, was your mother instrumental in your vocation? Leger? Father Dennis? He's not sure. I'm not sure. But all the studies show that most priests have found that their grandmothers or their mothers were influential, okay, and they're recognizing their call to priesthood, okay. So talk amongst yourselves now about faith and who was the greatest impact.
Okay, first and foremost, my apologies. I understand that some people have not been able to hear me, and that's because I don't like being wired. And I'm not very good at standing still. In fact, when I was in seminary in St. Mary's in Baltimore, because I would like move around when I was preaching, one time preaching Professor tied me to the pulpit. Faith, hope, and love. When you think about it, love and hope are essential parts of faith. They're all intertwined. Love compels us to speak of faith and of our faith. Faith allows us to hope, and hope seeks love and faith. I mentioned earlier that, oftentimes we get caught in making up our own plans for our lives. Okay? And that's certainly part of what a lot of our students are doing. Years ago, when I was at Archbishop Mitty, I had a wonderful young lady who was part of my campus ministry team, and her dream was to go to Stanford. Okay, she had this whole thing in her head. She was going to ride her bicycle through the Stanford, past the pavilion, and she was going to run into her boyfriend and her future husband and this whole thing. Yeah, that's it. So she comes into my office and she's crying. And she's talking while she's crying. How hard that is to understand. I'm like, okay, so just sit there and pay attention for a while. So eventually she calms down. And she did not get accepted at Stanford, which was her dream school. I understand that, okay? So after a while, I said to her, well, Jamie, where did you get accepted? She said, Harvard and MIT. I didn't say anything. So about 8 years ago, I did Jamie's wedding. Now, what is my custom is I usually run around to the front of the church, okay, to make sure the bride's okay and everything's fine and get ready for things. So I whisper in her ear, and I'm sure she probably doesn't even recall that conversation that she had in my office all those years ago. But I asked her, I said, where'd you meet this guy that you're about to marry? And she said, at Harvard. There you are. God makes God's self known through all kinds of wonderful events. And trust is crucial. Trusting God is absolutely crucial. Okay? Anyone have any questions? And again, my apologies for the people who were not able to hear because my voice went up and down. I kind of tend, because I'm right-handed, I kind of tend to go this way. I do that in the classroom too. And sometimes the kids used to pull me by the jacket. Any questions, comments?